Late into the hush of the evening, the little girl's sobs became a familiar lament, echoing through the modest home. The lights were dim, the adults exhausted, and the night sky glimmered coldly outside her bedroom window. No one knew exactly why she cried with such heartbreaking consistency. Sometimes it sounded like the longing of a soul that had been on earth too short a time to speak the fullness of her grief. Her pillow soaked up salty tears that refused to be restrained. Little did anyone suspect that an unlikely companion, a spirited German shepherd, would show this girl the reason for her tears and finally help her find peace. Every night, without fail, 8-year-old Clara Green wept in her bed. It started with a trembling lip, a shake in her small shoulders, and then evolved into open sobs, gentle but insistent. Her single mother, Melanie, had tried many tactics: warm milk, lullabies, bedtime stories about princesses and far-off lands. Sometimes, Melanie even left soothing music playing through an old radio by Clara's bedside. But no matter the method or how tired Clara was, the tears would come at some point between 11 at night and the first sign of dawn. Clara's bedroom was small. A star-patterned lamp cast dim shadows on her pastel yellow walls. A few stuffed animals crowded the corner of her bed, silent witnesses to her nighttime sorrow. Outside her door, the hallway remained lit by a single nightlight, shaped like a friendly moon, a beacon in the darkness. That light was for both mother and daughter. Melanie felt uneasy in the pitch-black home, her nerves perpetually on edge as she anticipated her child's tears that haunted each evening. It wasn't that Clara cried during the day. Her mornings, after a troubled sleep, were usually subdued. She would drag herself to the breakfast table, rub her puffy eyes, and pick half-heartedly at her scrambled eggs or cereal. Melanie would be sipping her coffee, eyes rimmed with dark circles from her own lack of sleep. Each was burdened by a sense of helplessness. Melanie's frustrations grew with each passing day, but she kept an even tone with her daughter, always telling herself that Clara's sadness came from a place no child should have to confront alone. Before all these tears, Clara had once been a vivacious little girl, bouncing on her bed with unstoppable energy, playing in the backyard with make-believe games, inviting imaginary friends to tea parties. But then things changed, almost like a switch had been flicked inside her. Melanie suspected it had to do with the sudden departure of Clara's father. He didn't leave a note. He barely gave an explanation. One day he was simply gone, and the illusions of a happy family life vanished with him. Though Clara was young, children sense these profound shifts, feel them in the air. Where once her father's arms had given her piggyback rides, there was now just a hollow space. No amount of bedtime stories could fill that. Melanie worked at a small business office in the city, roughly a 30-minute commute from their suburban neighborhood in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. She'd wake early and return late sometimes, but she tried to keep her schedule consistent enough so she could spend time with her daughter. Still, nights were the hardest. The strain showed in the lines on Melanie's face, the slump of her shoulders. Those nights, the echoes of Clara's sobs penetrated every corner of the tiny house, leaving neither mother nor daughter with the peace they so desperately needed. Outside the bedroom, in the living room, the television would flicker with late-night shows or nature documentaries that Melanie put on in an attempt to drown out the hush of tears from the other room. But no distraction truly worked. The nights seemed endlessly long, stretching like black taffy, refusing to release them from their sorrow. One early morning, as Melanie stood in her living room, wearing her worn-out robe and slippers, watching the sunrise cast a faint blush over the neighborhood, she decided she needed help. The next day, she made an appointment with a child therapist at the Winston Family Counseling Center. She knew something had to change. She couldn't watch Clara's heartbreak continue without trying to do more. She couldn't stand by while her daughter's world narrowed to a single pillow stained with tears. And deep inside, perhaps Melanie yearned for her own solace as well. After some initial appointments, the therapist, Dr. Ramirez, a patient woman with warm eyes and a gentle smile, explained to Melanie that Clara might be mourning her father's absence, but also something else might be at play. Dr. Ramirez invited Clara to draw pictures, to talk about her father, to talk about dreams or the things that made her happy. In these drawings, a recurring theme emerged. Clara was always alone at night. Sometimes the pictures featured a silhouette or a black shape hovering near her bed. Other times, a door was drawn half open, and on the other side was an incomplete figure, a scribble that might have been her father, or perhaps just the fear itself. Dr. Ramirez also suggested a new approach. If Clara was having trouble processing her emotions, a support system, another loving presence could help. Dr. Ramirez asked if they had any pets. Melanie shook her head. Life as a single working mother had always felt too complicated and busy for a pet. Moreover, she worried about the extra responsibility. But after thinking it over and discussing it in subsequent sessions, Melanie decided to visit a local rescue shelter. Maybe the unconditional love and companionship of an animal could fill an emptiness that neither mother nor child could tackle alone. That evening, perched on the old couch with Clara, Melanie gently broached the idea of adopting a dog. She saw a flicker in Clara's eyes when she mentioned the word dog. It wasn't a wide, beaming smile, but it was the most genuine spark of interest Melanie had seen in her daughter in weeks. They discussed the responsibilities, walking, feeding, grooming, and then they opened up a laptop to browse the local Winston-Salem animal rescue website. In the midst of dozens of pictures, beagles, lab mixes, pit bull puppies, senior collies, one face stood out, a German shepherd named Brutus. Brutus's picture was a simple headshot, his large ears pricked alert, his intelligent, dark brown eyes gazing at the camera with a hint of sadness. He was listed as 4 years old, rescued from a neglectful situation. The short bio read, "Brutus is cautious but warms up to loving humans quickly. Highly intelligent and protective, he would make a great companion. Needs patience and gentle guidance." There was a note about how he wasn't recommended for families with small children who might be rough, but Clara was gentle, thoughtful, and quiet. Something about Brutus's eyes pulled at Melanie's heart, and, surprisingly, Clara reached out and lightly touched the screen, as though trying to stroke his thick fur. The next morning, Melanie called the shelter. They set up an appointment for the weekend so that Clara and Melanie could meet Brutus in person. A mixture of excitement and hesitation colored their days until then. Clara's nighttime tears still came, but Melanie sensed a difference. Sometimes when Clara cried, she would roll onto her side and stare at the faint glow of the nightlight. Melanie wondered if, in those moments, Clara was thinking about the dog with the soulful eyes, imagining a better future. When Saturday arrived, they drove to the Winston-Salem Animal Rescue, a modest but well-maintained facility run mostly by volunteers. The front desk was decorated with pictures of happily adopted pets, families smiling beside wagging tails. A volunteer named Tanya led them down a hallway lined with kennels, where the barking and whining of dogs created a cacophony of greetings. Some dogs jumped excitedly against the chain-link doors, tongues lolling, eyes bright with anticipation. Others cowered in the backs of their runs, fearful of the commotion. Brutus was in the last kennel. He stood in the middle of his small enclosure, neither jumping nor cowering, but watching with a calm intensity. He had a thick, sable coat with the characteristic black saddle typical of a German shepherd. His ears stood like 2 miniature towers on his head, tall and alert. As Clara approached, Brutus's gaze followed her. There was a moment, something intangible, where child and dog locked eyes. Clara slowed her step, as though she were approaching a shy classmate on the first day of school. Then she quietly knelt in front of the chain-link door and placed her small palm against it. Brutus stepped forward. He gave a soft sniff in Clara's direction. The dog's posture was guarded. He was likely uncertain about these new humans, but he did not growl or retreat. Instead, he slowly pressed his nose through the fence, meeting Clara's outstretched fingers. Even behind the barrier, the lightest contact sparked something in both of them. Clara's eyes widened, and Brutus, for the first time since they'd arrived, wagged his long, bushy tail. It was a gentle, tentative wag, but a wag all the same. Melanie felt tears prick at her eyes. She almost couldn't believe it. Throughout their journey that day, many dogs had clamored for attention, but none had quite resonated with Clara. Here was a German shepherd with a reputation for caution, timid around strangers, yet drawn to Clara's quiet presence. Melanie had read once that sometimes the bonds between children and dogs can be instantaneous, formed in the hidden corners of hearts where trust and hope take root. Tanya let them step into Brutus's kennel, where Clara sat on the cold cement floor, cross-legged, letting Brutus sniff at her shoes, her elbows, her jacket. Eventually, with an encouraging nod from Tanya, Clara extended her hand again. Brutus leaned into it, resting his muzzle in her palm. There was a hush in that moment, as though the barking of the other dogs receded into the distance. Something unspoken seemed to pass between them, an understanding, a promise, maybe both. By the time they left the kennel, Clara was hugging Brutus around his neck, and although he remained composed, Brutus licked her cheek softly, as though returning the affection. Melanie watched them with a sense of awe. She couldn't explain it, but she felt as though she were witnessing the start of something transformative. The adoption process proceeded without major hurdles. The shelter arranged for a brief home check and provided instructions on how to care for Brutus. Melanie purchased essentials from a nearby PetSmart food bowls, a bed that was large enough to accommodate Brutus's size, a leash and a bag of Purina Pro Plan specifically formulated for large breed adult dogs. She felt a surge of responsibility, but also excitement, especially when she saw Clara, for once, sporting a small but genuine smile. On the day Brutus came home, he was understandably nervous. He padded into the living room, sniffing everything, the couch, the coffee table legs, the faint smell of old cooking in the kitchen. Clara followed him quietly, letting him explore at his own pace. It was a small house, but to Brutus, it might have seemed like a palace compared to the cramped kennel. Melanie had been advised to keep Brutus on a routine, to feed him at the same times each day, walk him regularly, and most of all, give him space to adjust. Clara insisted on helping prepare the dog's water bowl, carefully pouring cool, fresh water under her mother's watchful eye. Brutus drank with measured gulps, glancing up occasionally to see who watched him. Even after only a day, he seemed to associate the little girl with safety. Her presence didn't alarm him the way a new adult might. He followed Clara more frequently than Melanie, trailing her as she showed him the small backyard, pointed out the swing set that was rusted from years of disuse, and introduced him to her stuffed giraffe that had seen better days. Although Brutus was a real living creature, and the giraffe was an inanimate plush toy, Clara seemed to treat both with the same patient gentleness. That night, after dinner and a gentle walk around the block, they settled in for bedtime. Melanie fully expected Clara's tears, just as every night. Though Dr. Ramirez had suggested that a dog's presence might soothe Clara, Melanie understood these things don't change overnight. She left the door partially ajar, as usual, waiting for the cries to begin. Instead, she heard gentle murmuring. Quietly, Melanie tiptoed into the hallway. Through the crack in the door, she saw Clara lying in bed, Brutus on the floor beside her, resting his head on his paws. He was not yet permitted on the furniture, but just having him near seemed to give Clara a sense of safety. She spoke to him in a soft, almost whispery voice, as though telling him about her day, about her life, about the secrets in her heart. Brutus occasionally let out a gentle whine, as though acknowledging her words. That night, Clara's crying lessened. It wasn't gone, but it was softer, more restrained. When a few sniffles turned into trembling sobs, Brutus rose from his spot, placed his chin at the edge of her mattress, and stayed there. Clara reached out a hand to stroke his ears or the fur along his cheek. The tears slowed, replaced by the comforting sound of Brutus's breathing. Melanie watched for a moment longer, her own heart stirring with gratitude. She tiptoed back to her own room, hoping this was the start of something better. Over the next few weeks, Clara and Brutus developed a routine. Early morning found Clara tiptoeing into the kitchen before her mother was fully awake, filling Brutus's bowl with a modest scoop of Purina. She'd giggle when he devoured it with gusto, ears perked up at the crackle of the kibble bag. Then she would crouch by him and say something like, "Brutus, we'll play after school, okay?" The dog, of course, never answered in words, but there was understanding in his gaze. Melanie took them for afternoon walks when Clara returned home. They would pass the park, wave to neighbors, sometimes even stop to watch the local kids playing. Gradually, Clara became less timid around other children, occasionally saying hello or letting them pet Brutus. The dog's presence acted like a buffer, a safe barrier that allowed Clara to re-engage with a world that had felt too overwhelming just weeks before. In therapy sessions, Dr. Ramirez noted positive changes in Clara's demeanor, praising her for her new friend and the progress they were making together. But nights were still the big test. The tears no longer escalated to hysterical sobbing, yet they lingered in the shadows. Clara might cry for 5 or 10 minutes, seemingly triggered by the darkness or memories. Melanie learned to recognize the pattern. Clara would quietly weep, then call for Brutus. The German shepherd, who often slept on the hallway rug, would trot into her room, place his paws on the bed's edge, and softly nuzzle her. Even if it took half an hour, Clara eventually calmed, lulled by the dog's unwavering presence. Melanie wondered if there was a deeper reason behind Clara's crying. She suspected it wasn't just about the father's absence, but something more, an internal ache of not feeling safe, of feeling unworthy of love or frightened of being abandoned again. But with Brutus at her side, Clara began to express more in therapy. She started to voice that she felt empty sometimes and was afraid that the people she loved would disappear, just like her dad. Each time she confessed a fear, Dr. Ramirez would gently guide her, reminding her that while her dad might not return, there was still a future full of love and support, and a big part of that support had 4 legs and a wagging tail. Brutus, for his part, seemed to thrive under the care. His once guarded posture relaxed, and a playful side emerged. He brought a squeaky ball to Clara, teased her to chase him around the backyard, rolled onto his back to invite belly rubs. The scars of his own neglectful past began to fade. Occasionally, certain noises, a slammed door or the roar of a passing motorcycle, would make him tense, reminding Melanie of the dog's rough beginnings. But over time, Brutus learned this new home was safe, that this child with the tear-stained cheeks would never harm him. Despite the progress, life rarely moves in a straight line. One night, an unexpected phone call changed the precarious balance in their household. The voice on the other end belonged to Clara's father, Michael. He had been gone for over a year without a word, and suddenly he was calling, saying he missed Clara and wanted to see her. Melanie's heart twisted with conflicting emotions, anger, relief, worry. But above all, she knew she had to prioritize Clara's well-being. Clara overheard part of the conversation. She stood in the hallway, her arms hugging her torso as though trying to hold herself together. When Melanie hung up, Clara's eyes brimmed with tears, her lip quivering. She asked, "Why does he want to come back now? Why did he leave?" Melanie had no easy answers. She knelt, pulling Clara into a hug. Over her daughter's shoulder, she saw Brutus watching from the living room, ears tipped forward, as if sensing the tension. That night, Clara didn't just cry, she wailed. It was a sound that raked Melanie's heart, a sorrowful testament to all the confusion a child can hold inside. Brutus whined softly, circling around the bed, trying to offer comfort. But Clara's heartbreak was too raw, too entangled with betrayal and longing. The next few days brought more tears than Melanie had seen in months. Clara withdrew, skipping an afternoon walk or refusing to speak much in therapy. Brutus stayed close, so close that sometimes Clara would trip over him. She started snapping at him, frustrated with everything in her life. The dog, sensitive as ever, backed off, giving her space but visibly anxious. One evening, Clara even shouted at Brutus to go away, a startling shift from her usual gentle tone. She regretted it immediately, but the damage was done. Brutus retreated to the corner of the living room, tail tucked, ears drooping with hurt. Melanie found Clara sobbing in her bed later that night, the guilt of hurting her loyal friend compounding her sadness. Eventually, after a few days of intangible heaviness in the air, Melanie coaxed Clara into the living room, where Brutus lay with his chin on his paws. The little girl stepped closer and knelt. She apologized in a trembling voice, tears dropping onto the floor. Brutus looked up, his ears perking slightly, and licked her hand. In that gesture, all was forgiven. Children and dogs have a way of mending rifts quickly, guided by instincts of trust and unconditional love. For Clara, it was a reminder that even when she felt overwhelmed, she wasn't alone. Eventually, Clara's father came to visit. It was awkward and tense. He arrived wearing a worn jacket, an apologetic smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Melanie watched him from the doorway, arms crossed, unsure how to reconcile this man with the father who had abandoned them. Clara sat stiffly on the couch, with Brutus at her feet, stoically watching the stranger. When Michael tried to approach, Brutus offered a low growl of warning, protective instincts kicking in. Melanie placed a calming hand on Brutus's collar, and Michael took a step back. It was clear that trust would not be offered easily. For Clara, the meeting brought a rush of conflicting emotions. She wanted to run into her father's arms and cling to him, to demand answers, to show him how much his absence had hurt. Instead, she stared at the coffee table, tears leaking silently down her cheeks. Michael attempted an apology, stumbling over words like mistake and needed time and regret. Brutus stayed close, letting Clara lean against him. If she trembled, the dog steadied her with the warmth of his fur. They spent the afternoon in the living room, a forced sort of conversation occupying the air. Melanie served tea, her voice measured and cool. Clara's father recounted vague stories of wandering, searching for answers, but not fully explaining his disappearance. With each halting sentence, Clara's eyes would flick toward the man she barely recognized. By early evening, Michael left, promising to call soon, but no one felt certain about what the future held. That night, Clara cried again, but differently, less from hopelessness, more from the exhaustion of confronting a painful memory. Once more, Brutus was there, sitting beside her bed. This time, Clara wrapped her arms around his neck and sobbed into his fur, letting out the emotional storm that had been bottled inside her. And maybe, in the midst of those sobs, there was a small kernel of relief. She had faced her father, survived the hurt, and still had someone by her side who would never abandon her. Time marched on, as it always does, carrying the family into a new phase of healing. Michael's visits remained sporadic, each time dredging up old wounds, but also offering Clara a chance to practice articulating her feelings rather than bottling them up. Therapy sessions continued, with Dr. Ramirez guiding Clara through drawing, role play with puppets, and journaling exercises. In these sessions, Clara often mentioned Brutus, how she felt safe with him, how she talked to him when she couldn't talk to anyone else. The entire dynamic of the house changed. Laughter began to ripple through the halls, albeit softly at first. A giggle here and there when Brutus did something silly, like chase his tail or bury a chew toy under the couch cushion. Clara's footsteps became lighter, her posture a bit straighter. Melanie noticed that the tears at night gradually became shorter and less frequent. There were evenings when Clara would only sniffle for a moment, then shift in bed, comforted by the soft panting of the German shepherd who lay near her feet. Once, Melanie found a hand-drawn picture on the dining table. It was done in crayon. The picture showed a girl with a bright yellow dress, a beaming smile, and a large German shepherd beside her. The word family was scrawled at the top, with smaller figures representing Melanie and even a somewhat ambiguous figure that might have been her father. But the key focus was the girl and the dog, standing side by side, emanating a feeling of shared joy. Melanie carefully placed the drawing on the refrigerator, tears welling in her eyes at this symbol of her daughter's resilience. By late spring, Clara and Brutus had turned the backyard into their playground. The neglected swing set, once haunted by emptiness, now rang with squeals of delight. Clara would swing high, her hair flying in the breeze, while Brutus chased the arcs of her feet, barking in excitement. On weekends, Melanie took them to a nearby park for longer walks. They discovered hidden trails, small streams, and open fields where Brutus could romp and chase a frisbee. These outings became a source of bonding, a slow but steady healing for them all. One memorable Saturday, the family decided to take a trip to Pilot Mountain State Park, a well-known site near Winston-Salem. It was Clara's first big outing with Brutus beyond their usual stomping grounds. She was anxious at first, so many people, new smells and sounds for Brutus, the possibility of running into triggers, but Melanie reassured her that they'd keep the dog on a secure leash and watch his body language. If at any point the crowds or environment became too overwhelming, they would leave. But Brutus handled it well, trotting confidently by Clara's side, ears flicking at the chatter of other hikers, nose quivering at the scent of pine needles and damp soil. He seemed more alive than ever, and that energy transferred to Clara. She beamed as she watched him sniff along the trail, tail wagging in unstoppable curiosity. They took pictures at scenic overlooks, the iconic knob of Pilot Mountain rising behind them like an ancient guardian. In each photo, Clara clung to Brutus, smiling so brightly that Melanie wondered if she was even the same girl who used to cry for hours at night. During their walk, they encountered another family with a friendly golden retriever. Clara hesitated, not sure how Brutus would react, but the two dogs sniffed politely. Soon enough, Brutus and the golden retriever were wagging their tails, and Clara found herself talking to the other family's daughter about how she'd adopted Brutus, how he'd helped her feel safe at night. The other girl listened, nodding sympathetically, and then talked about her own experience with nightmares after losing a grandparent. The shared moment of vulnerability between children and dogs was a testament to how universal love and healing can be. By the end of that day, Clara was asleep in the car before they even pulled out of the parking lot. Brutus curled up in the back with a happy pant. Melanie smiled at them through the rearview mirror, heart brimming with gratitude. Even though things were improving, old habits die hard. One particularly stormy night, thunder rolled through Winston-Salem, shaking windows and rattling nerves. Clara had always been wary of thunderstorms. She hated the sudden flashes of lightning, the boom that echoed in her chest. That night, she woke up around midnight, trembling under her covers. Melanie was asleep in the next room, exhausted from a long week at work. Clara whimpered quietly, pulling the blanket over her head as another clap of thunder roared outside. Brutus, sensing her distress, jumped onto the bed, something he rarely did without invitation. He nestled beside her, pressing his warm body against hers. Clara clutched fistfuls of his fur. As lightning illuminated the room for a split second, she saw her reflection in Brutus's eyes, scared, vulnerable, but not alone. The thunder crashed again, but this time she heard a low, comforting rumble in Brutus's chest, a gentle vibration that seemed to say, "I'm here." She breathed in his musky, familiar scent, steadying her heartbeat to match his. In that quiet exchange, Clara felt something shift inside her. For the first time, she didn't feel compelled to hide her tears, nor did she feel lost in them. The storm might rage outside, but here, under the covers with Brutus's warmth, she felt safe. The sob that threatened to erupt became a soft exhalation instead. She pressed her forehead against his neck, letting the dog's presence envelop her. It was a tangible moment of comfort, a sign that even when confronted by old fears, she could find courage in connection. In her next session with Dr. Ramirez, Clara spoke more openly than ever before. She described the thunderstorm, how Brutus had stayed close, how she didn't feel the familiar spiral into overwhelming tears. Dr. Ramirez smiled warmly, nodding as Clara recounted the event. Melanie listened from an adjacent chair, blinking back her own tears of pride. They discussed coping strategies, breathing exercises, imagining a safe place, or focusing on a comforting memory. Dr. Ramirez emphasized how Brutus served as a living anchor, teaching Clara how to ground herself in the present rather than drowning in fear or sadness. They wrote down these strategies in a small journal that Clara promised to keep by her bedside. A week later, Clara participated in a group therapy session for children with anxiety. It was a gentle, play-based environment. Each child brought something that made them feel safe: a blanket, a stress ball, a photograph. Clara brought a picture of Brutus. She told the group about her dog, how he'd been abandoned, how he showed her that even if someone left you behind once, it doesn't mean everyone will. Her voice shook slightly, but she pressed on, describing how Brutus had helped her with her crying at night, his steady heartbeat, a comfort in the darkness. Some of the other children nodded. One boy shared that he had a stuffed tiger that helped him feel brave. A girl talked about her older brother who would read stories to calm her down. By sharing, Clara felt less alone. She realized other kids also struggled with fears and sadness, that it wasn't a mark of weakness, but simply a part of life. And she had something else, a living, breathing friend who taught her she could be brave, that the night didn't have to be a realm of endless tears. Just as stability seemed to take root, Michael re-entered the picture. He had a proposition. He wanted to make amends, to spend more time with Clara. He even floated the idea of taking her for a weekend so she could see where he lived now. Melanie wrestled with the decision. She consulted with Dr. Ramirez, who advised caution, ensuring Clara felt comfortable with any arrangement. When they broached the topic with Clara, she clutched Brutus's fur, eyes clouded with doubt. She agreed to meet her father in a neutral place first, a local ice cream shop named Bluebird Scoops, a real establishment in downtown Winston-Salem known for its homemade flavors. When the day came, Clara arrived with Melanie and Brutus outside, of course, since dogs weren't allowed inside the shop, but Brutus lay by an outdoor table. Michael greeted them, looking a bit more put together than before, wearing a clean shirt and a hopeful expression. They ordered ice cream. Clara got strawberry. Her father got butter pecan. Melanie chose chocolate. The conversation was stilted at first. Clara mainly answered with nods or brief yes or no responses. Michael tried to joke about old memories, the time they built a Lego castle that took up half the living room floor, or how he used to make monster pancakes by splattering the batter in strange shapes. Slowly, Clara opened up. She talked about school, therapy, and, of course, Brutus. Michael expressed regret that he hadn't been there when Clara got her first pet. He asked if he could pet Brutus. Clara hesitated, then led him to the dog. Brutus regarded Michael warily, but with Clara's hand on his collar, he allowed a slow pat on the head. It was a small step, but an important one. Over the next few weeks, Michael made an effort. He showed up for planned meetups, took Clara to a movie, even met her at the park with Brutus. Each time, the trust between father and daughter grew by a tiny fraction. The nights remained somewhat stable. Clara still had her moments, but the presence of Brutus and her newfound coping skills kept her from descending into the deep sobs of before. One evening, after a particularly good day spent with her dad, Clara didn't cry at all. She lay in bed, silently replaying the day's events in her mind. Brutus, sensing calm rather than distress, snored lightly at her feet, unaware of the quiet triumph that blossomed in the girl's heart. Raising a large German shepherd in a small suburban home wasn't always smooth sailing. Brutus had a high energy level, and sometimes Clara or Melanie forgot to close a gate or secure the trashcan lid, leading to comedic mishaps. Once, Brutus knocked over a kitchen chair in his exuberant dash for the backyard, startling them both. Another time, he managed to open the bathroom door and startled Melanie while she was cleaning the tub. Despite the small frustrations, these incidents often ended with exasperated laughter, a testament to the warmth and liveliness Brutus brought into their lives. Clara's therapy progressed, and she started talking about her future, something Melanie had rarely heard her do before. Instead of focusing solely on the past or her fears, Clara spoke of wanting to learn to ride horses someday or to visit the ocean. She confided that she might want to be a vet or an animal rescue volunteer when she grew up, so she could help dogs like Brutus. Melanie's heart soared when she heard these dreams. She recognized it as a sign that Clara was beginning to see a tomorrow worth living for, a tomorrow where sorrow wasn't the only option. Meanwhile, Melanie experienced her own personal growth. Watching Clara evolve from a constantly tearful child to a blossoming young girl taught Melanie that she, too, could face her own grief and anger about her ex-husband's betrayal. She started journaling, practicing mindfulness, and even took a few yoga classes recommended by Dr. Ramirez. Though Melanie's burdens didn't vanish, she found healthier ways to cope, reaffirming that a single mother's strength can be shaped by both vulnerability and determination. One evening, Clara had a dream. In it, she stood in a dark room, weeping uncontrollably as shadows danced around her. Then Brutus appeared, a glowing presence, and he guided her toward a door with his muzzle. She opened the door and found a garden bathed in sunlight. Birds sang, flowers swayed, and her father stood at a distance, waving. Melanie was there too, and she beckoned. With each step, Clara felt lighter, the tears drying on her cheeks. When she awoke, a single tear rolled down her face, not from sadness, but from a gentle release. Like exhaling a breath she'd been holding for too long. She sat up, finding Brutus curled at the foot of her bed, dozing peacefully. A stream of moonlight shone through the curtain, illuminating the dog's noble profile. For a moment, Clara watched him in silent appreciation. In her mind, she whispered gratitude for this companion who never once asked her why she cried, who never judged her for feeling too much, who simply stayed and showed her she wasn't alone. In that instant, she understood the why behind her nightly tears. She had been terrified of being abandoned, of not being enough for the people she loved. But now, she realized that even if some people left, others would stay. She was worthy of love and connection. Clara slipped out of bed, crouched beside Brutus, and hugged him. He stirred, blinking in confusion, then licked her cheek. She stayed like that for a few minutes, letting the closeness anchor her in the present, reminding her of how far she had come. As months went by, Clara's nighttime crying diminished to occasional sniffles. Sometimes she still shed tears. Grief and fear do not vanish completely. But there was a marked difference. They were no longer the tears of an inconsolable child, but the tears of a person learning to navigate complex emotions. She cried when she was sad, then found ways to soothe herself through journaling, breathing exercises, or simply cuddling with Brutus. Eventually, Clara started telling her story more openly. At school, she wrote a short essay about rescue animals for an English assignment. She described how adopting Brutus changed her life, helped her cope with loneliness, and taught her about trust. The essay ended with a simple line: "Sometimes it takes loving someone who needs help to realize how much help we need ourselves." Her teacher was moved, awarding her an A and reading passages aloud to the class. Clara glowed with pride, but also humility, looking over at Brutus's picture on her binder. He had become a symbol not just of healing, but of shared compassion. Melanie, noticing Clara's newfound confidence, dared to dream of bigger things. She planned a weekend trip to the coast Wrightsville Beach, where Clara had always wanted to see the ocean. They booked a pet-friendly cottage, ensuring Brutus could come along. The trip was magical for them. Early morning walks on the sand, Brutus bounding in the shallow surf, Clara laughing as she chased waves. Together, they watched the sun rise over the horizon, pink and orange light dancing on the water. In that vast expanse of sea and sky, their troubles seemed smaller, their hopes bigger. The bond between Clara and Brutus continued to deepen. If Clara was reading in her bedroom, Brutus would rest his head on her lap or place a paw gently on the pages, as though asking to be included. When Clara practiced her therapy skills, visualizing a safe space, she often pictured Brutus in a sunlit field, waiting to guide her through any anxious moment. In reality, he guided her just as effectively, a living, breathing anchor that reaffirmed she could make it through tough nights. Melanie, touched by their connection, began to volunteer at the shelter where they first found Brutus. On Saturdays, she and Clara would walk dogs, clean kennels, or help with feeding. Brutus sometimes accompanied them, interacting with the other dogs in a calm, friendly manner. He became a sort of ambassador for the shelter, a shining example of how adoption and patience could transform a frightened, neglected dog into a cherished family member. Clara would beam whenever volunteers praised Brutus or asked about his progress. With each success story, she felt her own story being validated. Here was proof that broken things could heal, that love could flourish in the unlikeliest of places. During this time, Michael continued to rebuild his relationship with Clara. He never moved back in Melanie, didn't think that was in anyone's best interest, but he did remain consistent in his visits. Occasionally, he'd ask if he could take Clara and Brutus to a nearby park, or if Clara might want to visit his small apartment. Clara agreed, slowly and cautiously. She took Brutus with her the first few times, feeling safer with him around. Michael respected that, never pushing too hard, just grateful to be included in her life again. One afternoon, Clara returned from a visit with Michael in surprisingly good spirits. She told Melanie how they had gone for a walk by the river, how her father told her stories about his new job in construction, and how he regretted missing her birthdays. Clara didn't cry this time. She spoke calmly, almost matter-of-factly, about the good and the bad. She ended with, "I don't know if I trust him completely yet, but I think I can forgive him a little." That statement, for Melanie, was monumental. Forgiveness is rarely simple, but it can be a powerful step in healing old wounds. When Clara turned 10, Melanie decided to throw a small birthday party in their backyard. They invited a few of Clara's friends from school and therapy, along with close neighbors who had watched their journey from a distance. Brutus was, of course, the center of attention. Wearing a goofy party hat that Clara had strapped to his head, he accepted pats and treats with dignified enthusiasm. They set up a simple table with cupcakes, fruit punch, and decorations that Clara helped design. Balloons swayed in the gentle breeze, and the once rusted swing set was refurbished with fresh paint, now a symbol of how far they'd come. During the party, Clara played tag with her friends, squealing with delight as Brutus joined the chase. Melanie watched from the patio, sipping lemonade, chatting with a neighbor. It was the first time in ages that she felt truly at ease, not hovering anxiously to catch Clara's tears or forestall a meltdown. Her daughter looked happy, genuinely, unequivocally happy. At one point, Clara ran up to Melanie, face flushed and bright, and hugged her. No words were exchanged, but the warmth of that embrace spoke volumes. It said, "We made it. We're okay." When Michael arrived partway through, bringing a gift in a simple paper bag, Clara greeted him with a small smile. He handed her a plush German Shepherd toy, an obvious tribute to Brutus. Clara giggled, hugging it gently. Then, in front of everyone, she turned to Brutus, perched on the edge of the patio, and told him, "Thank you for everything." It was a child's heartfelt declaration, but it struck a chord. Melanie felt tears of happiness blur her vision. The neighborhood kids, who might not have understood the full story, clapped anyway, because it felt right. The evening ended with sparklers, each child holding one as twilight fell. Brutus stood with them, ears perked, curious about the flickering lights. In that magical glow, Clara twirled, her laughter intertwining with the sizzle of sparks. No tears tonight, no sorrow, just a celebration of a little girl's journey from heartbreak to hope. At bedtime, after everyone had gone home and the backyard was quiet, Clara and Melanie sat on Clara's bed. Brutus lay across their feet, his breathing slow and steady. Clara held the plush German Shepherd from her father. She studied it, fingers tracing the soft fur. Then she looked at her real German Shepherd, dozing contentedly near her ankles, and whispered, "I think I finally know why I cried every night." Melanie tilted her head, encouraging her to continue. Clara swallowed, as though measuring her words. "I cried because I felt alone. I thought that if Dad could leave, maybe everyone could leave. Maybe it was my fault. But Brutus, he never left. He never judged me. He showed me that I wasn't alone, that it wasn't my fault." She paused, tears forming, but not from despair, rather from relief and gratitude. "And now, I don't have to cry every night, because I know I'm loved. Even if Dad left, there are people and dogs who stay. And that means I can hope." Melanie pressed a soft kiss to Clara's forehead, voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, sweet girl, you can hope. You deserve all the happiness in the world." Brutus, stirred by their voices, lifted his head and gave a gentle sigh, as though affirming their words. That night, for the first time in 2 years, Clara fell asleep without shedding a single tear, and in the corner of the room, the moon-shaped nightlight glowed softly, illuminating the quiet peace that had finally settled in. Life didn't become perfect. No, life is, but it became undeniably better. Clara still had occasional nightmares, and sometimes the sight of her father triggered complicated emotions. Yet each setback found her stronger, quicker to seek solace in the unconditional love of her German Shepherd, or the compassion of her mother, or the understanding of her therapist. She learned that growth is a journey, not a destination, and every tear that still fell was a reminder of how far she'd come. Brutus aged gracefully, remaining a steadfast presence in the household. He lay by the kitchen table during homework sessions, trotted proudly beside Clara on walks, and dozed in the living room while Melanie and Clara watched movies. Every so often, Clara would place her cheek against his broad shoulder, feeling the warmth of him, remembering when she was just a frightened child who thought the darkness would never end. The dog's breathing, a rhythmic lullaby, reminded her that storms pass, wounds heal, And love can bridge even the deepest chasms. Looking back, Clara could pinpoint the moment her life changed. It was when she first pressed her hand against the chain-link fence at the shelter, and Brutus stepped forward to meet her. They had each been lost in their own ways, she in her grief, he in his abandonment. In that moment of connection, they saved each other. The night could still be dark, but they found light in each other's presence. And so, the little girl who once cried every night discovered her why and realized that sometimes understanding your own heartbreak is the key to moving beyond it. The German Shepherd taught her that love doesn't erase pain, but it can make it bearable. It can give you the courage to step forward, to trust, and to hope for dawn after the longest night. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. Thank you for joining Clara's moving journey from heartbreak to healing. Through the gentle guidance of Brutus's unwavering presence, she found the courage to face her deepest fears and discover a love that never wavered. When her father's absence threatened to shatter her trust, the steadfast loyalty of a rescued German shepherd proved stronger than any darkness. This story reminds us that even the simplest bonds, like a child and her dog, can spark the most profound transformations. If Clara's story touched your heart, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing it with someone who could use some hope today. And if you want to hear more emotional stories of resilience and the remarkable power of the human-animal connection, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Together, let's keep spreading messages of love, strength, and the enduring promise of second chances.